My name is Reagan George. I'm the founder and president of the Virginia Voters Alliance.
My name is Sonali Chitre. I'm originally from Bethesda, Maryland. I now live in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm an environmental attorney.
I just assumed elections were free and fair and everybody was honest and upright. When I started seeing after the 2008 election, I saw that the Democratic Party had gotten in bed with the Acorn people. The debt, the unbalanced budgets, all those types of things. I said, I've got to start doing something. So that's when I joined the Tea Party.
I've actually been volunteering for the past 8 or 9 months with South Asians for Obama, and I've been working in New York, Pennsylvania, and since I'm from Maryland, I decided to come down to Virginia.
We're empowered by True the Vote in the fact that we use their online system to try to investigate or analyze the voter registrations by address. We're doing poll watching, training people around what they need to be watching for in the form of voter fraud. And then, of course, we've got the legislative agenda where we know that the Virginia laws are lax, they're ill-defined, they're nebulous in a lot of cases.
In Pennsylvania, there was so much confusion about what kind of ID you actually needed. I mean, do you need to have an actual driver's license if you have a student ID? When did you have to get it? Does it have to have a date on it? I know universities like Temple actually changed all their student IDs so they have dates on them so they could be used as IDs, and then the law was actually struck down because, I mean, the judges were even saying, you know, look, our IDs aren't sufficient.
A lot of people don't think in terms of how do you cheat the system. So when you start pointing out how easy it is to cheat the system, they have two responses. One of them, they're appalled that people would want to do that, and then they get mad that people would do that.
I really believe in deliberation, and that means trying to build from finding some truth claim on the other side and building from common ground there. I have a lot of trouble with that in the voter fraud situation. Obviously, we can agree on the principle of it, but this is almost entirely a reaction to voter success, not voter fraud. We should be in a system where both sides should want as many people as possible to vote. So when you see these efforts coming entirely from the Republican side with the goal of preventing people from voting, when the fraud does not exist in any systematic way, in any statistically relevant way, and you know the effect of that is to prevent many people, particularly many poor folks and low-income voters, from voting, I think it is pretty cynical and pretty craven.
Voter fraud is essentially non-existent. There have been a handful, literally a handful, of reported instances of actual voter fraud around the entire nation.
Yeah, that's your Brennan Center talking point. We hear that all the time. Let me give you an analogy that you could use. My bank has never been robbed. My bank down here at Bank of America, it's never been robbed, never had a robbery. So does that mean that the bank should not have a vault, shouldn't have cameras, shouldn't have guards, shouldn't have internal controls to safeguard my money?
Well, it's possible I'm going to win the World Series of Poker someday, but I'm not going to make my financial decisions based on the possibility that I'm going to do that. And if we took all that energy and all that money that the right wing is spending and put it into helping more Americans vote, that seems to me like if you care about the integrity of voting, you would want to make sure that the vote reflects as much as possible the feeling of the American people. Now, we know every single poll shows that the American people are far more progressive than the electorate that shows up. In other words, the closer that the actual voting gets to where the American people are, the worse that is for the conservative agenda.
I definitely want to intimidate dead voters. I want to intimidate voters that are non-citizens. I want to intimidate voters that are felons that haven't had their rights to vote granted. When those people vote, they not only disenfranchise me, but they disenfranchise you. They disenfranchise everyone.
It's really targeting minorities and older folks and people that, you know, that don't necessarily have a driver's license or don't necessarily have a student ID. I mean, an old Chinese grandmother living in Chinatown with her, you know, child's family may not have an ID, but if she's a U.S. citizen and if she's over 18, she has the right to vote in this election.
The public needs to understand that what sounds like a good idea in principle, making sure that people are who they say they are when they come to vote at the polls, can in fact pose huge barriers to people exercising their right to vote.
Because we would have had to first find her birth certificate, then we would have had to find her marriage license. I'm serious. And my mother's in the same situation. I thought about it. My mother's 86. We would have the same predicament.
It's very difficult and costly to obtain that information. And people who are not well schooled in the bureaucracy of the state may find it beyond their abilities.
We turned over 1,000 challenges to the registrar. And she came back and told us that about 65% of them were valid. 16 voters registered at a Taco Bell, or a parking garage, or an administration building at George Mason, or whatever. That is not correct. That needs to be fixed. And I don't care if we find one fraudulent voter there, or if we find 100 fraudulent voters there, or even if we don't even convict any fraudulent voters. I still want that process to be fixed.
What they've done, from what we can see, we're still doing research on it, is that they are intentionally challenging thousands upon thousands of these folks, causing citizens to have to then defend themselves.
Just because they went out and tried to clean it up and disenfranchised a few people along the way doesn't mean that they should not have tried to clean it up. So yeah, there may be some collateral damage.
And then you see this fellow Nathan Sproul, who has been known to destroy voter registration forms for Democrats and do a lot of fraudulent activity, and to know that he has been paid by the Republican Party.
You have ironically seen the only actual systematic efforts at voter suppression and voter tampering to be on the Republican side, whether it's this company that's been called out in the Virginia case and other cases, whether it is the suppression efforts to prevent legitimate voters from voting.
What if the cost is denying a legal, qualified, eligible voter his or her vote?
That's one of the techniques that the liberals always use, is they try to find this one example and make the rule around that one example.
I don't know, that might happen, but for example, Florida purged its voting rolls only to find out later that it was done in a sloppy manner, and hundreds of thousands of people were taken up, and that's a big, because that's a big
deal. But why were they having to do that in the first place? The reason they were having to do that in the first place was the fact that they had enacted crappy laws in the past that allowed non-citizens to register to vote.